I know we've sung it faster, but we're talking about being slow, so.
Yeah, no.
I was being slow.
We might slow the third, I'll see.
Is that too fast?
Oh, that's great.
That's fine.
This is very familiar.
Good morning. We will get started with our Sunday school lesson. On a rather dark day, want to welcome the people that were up in Canada back. I haven't talked to too many of them yet, but I heard that it was a good trip. They even got in some fishing on the sideline. So, okay, let's get started with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, as we come to you, we thank you once again for the day that you've given to us. We thank you for the rain to refresh the crops and the grass. We pray, Lord, that you would be with us as we study your word once again, that it would be profitable, that we would gain knowledge, that we would gain understanding, that we would be challenged by the word that you have given to us. We ask these things in your precious name. Amen. Okay, we were just at the place where Jesus is in the last week of his life before the crucifixion. He has just cleaned out the temple, and he came out of the temple with his disciples at the beginning of chapter 13, and the disciples are talking about, look at this temple, look at the wonderful stones that this temple was made of, and Jesus is talking about the fact that it is going to be destroyed. And I told you you ought to have a picture, and so I warned Ginny that I was going to be showing a picture of her, and she said, well, she was going to have a nursery duty this morning. So anyway, so you can see the size of the rocks that they had for this wall. This is one rock that goes from Ginny all the way to the person that's at the other end. And then they moved this somehow or other when they built this wall to build the Temple Mount. And this is what Jesus is saying, that the Romans are going to be destroying this. And there were rocks like this that they destroyed. So anyway, Jesus is talking about this to the disciples, about what's going to happen. And now we see the signs of the close of the age with verse 3, chapter 13, verse 3. And we see that as this is future, this is prophecy. And again, as I mentioned last Sunday, there's usually two parts to prophecy. One is a fairly narrow prophecy that's going to take place fairly soon. Another is a prophecy that's going to be way off in the future. And as he sat on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign when all these things are about to be accomplished? And Jesus began to say to them, see that no one leads you astray. So the disciples knew that there was trouble, that there was going to be something happening. And Jesus said that, careful that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name saying, I am he, and they will lead many astray. And so even during this time that the disciples are talking about, that there were going to be individuals that were going to be coming and saying that they were Jesus, that they were the Christ. And the disciples knew that they were with the Christ, they were with Jesus, but that there were going to be a lot of false imposters. False imposters, is that repeating myself? So anyway, an imposter would be false. So anyway, we have the Jesus warning against these heresies that were going to be taking place. Now, this was going to be taking place shortly. This is also going to be taking place in the future as we go on into the tribulation and the end times. And as I said, I'm not going to go through the end times in detail with this. One of the things that I want to see is that what Jesus is saying here and the chapter 13, basically what it means is that be ready. Do the things that you are being commanded to do and be ready. You don't know when this is going to happen. And Jesus, even as being God, he laid aside this knowledge, and having the knowledge of when this is going to take place, Jesus, in his now his manhood, he had laid this aside, and even he did not know when this was going to take place. But the disciples are asking what was going to be some of the indications of this. And verse 6 says, "Many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and they will lead many astray. And when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. These are but the beginning of the birth pains." And so, pointing out some of the things that are going to be happening. Now, we hear a lot of people saying, that we've had some major earthquakes that have taken place. There was one that actually was an offshore earthquake that took place off of the coast of Japan not too long ago, and there were some major earthquakes. And is this the indication that Jesus is coming? Not necessarily. Those are just things that are happening. The storms that we have and the hurricanes that we have, these are just things that are happening as a normal result of us living in a world that is cursed. It's cursed because of Satan, and so we have the normal things that are taking place. So to say that, to point to any particular situation and saying that is an indication that the end time is coming, that Jesus is going to be returning, that the rapture is going to be taking place. No, we can't really say this. There are a lot of people that have put a lot of dates out and have looked rather foolish because for years we've had these dates and nothing has ever happened on these dates. And so we see that there were going to be things taking place. There will be things taking place. Verse 9 says, "But be on your guard." And so we are supposed to be on our guard. Now, the city of Jerusalem was overthrown in AD 70. This is when the Romans came in and overthrew that. And there were, from Jesus' time, now this is somewhere around AD 30, where he is talking to his disciples. And so we have about 40 years from the time that Jesus is talking to his disciples to when the Romans came in and overthrew Jerusalem. And there were a lot of things that were happening. Some of these heresies and the infighting that was taking place. The Romans themselves, between the various rulers that were in Jerusalem and in that area, there was a lot of infighting that was taking place there. So it was not a peaceful time. Then we also see that the Jews were being persecuted during this time. Now, there's an area that we see. This area is close to Magdala, between Magdala and Tiberias, and this is where the caravans went through, and you see the cliffs that are up there and the holes. This is where a lot of Jews lived during the time, from the time that Jesus is speaking, and because of the Romans persecuting them, a lot of the Jews lived in those caves. Now, the Romans ferreted them out by a couple of ways. One is they had giant hooks that they would use, and they would throw those hooks in there and pull the people out, or they would have soldiers coming on down. They would lower them in baskets from the top of the cliff, and then they would have fire, and they would burn the fire on in and burn the people out like this. So you had a lot of this type of thing going on even until after after Jerusalem was thrown down. We have Masada, and I was going to look this up, and I don't remember exactly when Masada took place, when they actually committed suicide on Masada, all of the people that were there, but they were there, and this was after Jerusalem had been destroyed. Masada was still around for a short time after this, and the Romans tried to get to vanquish that, and they were able to get they didn't get the people off. The people committed suicide, except for, I think it was 3 ladies that hid, and they were the ones that were able to write what had actually happened on Masada. But Masada was a mesa that was down by the Dead Sea, and this is an area, the going to happen to them even in their local synagogues. You had the temple in Jerusalem, and then you had synagogues in the various cities and the towns. If there were 10 families in an area, they would then have a synagogue. And the leaders of the synagogue were corrupt, and they were also against the Christians, those that are following Christ, and says that they were bearing witness against them. Then in verse 10, and the gospel must first be proclaimed to all nations, and when they bring you to trial and deliver you over, do not be anxious beforehand what you are to say, but say whatever is given you in that hour, for it is not you who speak, but the Holy Spirit. And brother will deliver brother over to death, and father his child, and children will rise against parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but the other who endures to the end will be saved. So we see some of the things that were going to be happening during this time to the Jews. And this was in the generation that Jesus is speaking about. That's probably the same thing that's going to happen in the future. And I think that we see is somewhat of this even today, even though it's not a marker of what specifically is going to, when it's going to happen. but we still have an indication that there is going to be some type of persecution for the Christians. We don't see it here in the United States directly, although some of our Christian philosophies and attitudes and the things that are given to us in the Word are definitely being pushed against in the school system, in the governmental system, and so on. We have situations that are difficult for Christians to be able to put up with. One of our Schaefer teachers has two sons who have been, who are teachers, who've just gotten their teacher certificates in Minnesota. And they have had to go through all kinds of training as far as the LGBTQ training is concerned. They've had to go through all of this and to actively supposed to be teaching this in the classroom. So we're seeing that even in our schools, our public schools, we have these types of things that are going on today, and just a general deterioration of the mores, of the spiritual attitudes that are given to us and that Jesus is giving here to the disciples. Any comments or questions so far? Okay, then starting with verse 14. But when you see the abomination of desolation standing where he ought not to be, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Here I think he is speaking specifically about the tribulation. And the he that he speaks about here is the Antichrist. Now, at this time, there was a total desecration of the altar that we have in the temple, where Antiochus Epiphanes slaughtered a pig on the altar, and he had sacrifices with pigs instead of with lambs. And we know that the pig is something that the Jewish people were not supposed to partake down nor enter the house to take anything out. And let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days. Pray that it may not happen in winter. For in those days there will be such tribulation as has not been from the beginning of the creation that God created until now and never will be. And if the Lord had not cut short the days, no human being could be saved. But for the sake of the elect whom he chose, he shortened the days. So we have this very difficult time, and we see that this is during the time of the tribulation, or the start of the tribulation, the same thing. Now again, I am confident that the Christians, the church, is going to be raptured before this time of the tribulation, but there are going to be individuals that are going to be saved during the time of the tribulation, and the first 3.5 So we see that we have this one. Thank you, Tanner. I always forget this. I'm glad that there are other people that look out for me now that my wife can't. It says, and then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or look, there he is, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, the elect. But be on guard. I have told you all things beforehand. So we see that there's going to be heresies that are going to be formed. And we've talked about this earlier in this class. What is a heresy? Yes, Grant, we've got a microphone coming.
Personally, I believe a heresy is a deviation in doctrine where apostasy is a complete rejection.
Okay, deviation of doctrine, apostasy, or complete rejection. Anyone else have another comment about a heresy, what a heresy is? Okay, one of the definitions that I saw was constructing a doctrine which is something that suits yourself. And so you take a certain doctrine, and this will suit just you. And heresies generally occur when you have an individual that goes onto one little rabbit trail and they just really push that rabbit trail, or they really go along that line. I know that I wouldn't call this a heresy, but Pastor McLaughlin, Dr. McLaughlin, mentioned this one time. He said that his pastorates went well, except the one time when he got involved with a little bit of the, what is the gospel where you rich and famous, yeah, and so on. And he started on that line just a little bit, and he said his ministry just went downhill, and he realized that he was wrong in this, and that he needed to get back to just teach what the Bible teaches and so on. So anyway, we see this. Now here's something, we have a term for a heresy which is called antinomianism. Okay, this is probably a word that you have not used this morning so far. Okay, antinomianism is the idea that grace allows for continued sin. Okay, we have grace. We don't need to follow a moral law. We don't need to because if we sin, that's all right. God is going to forgive us. And this comes from Romans chapter 6. Romans chapter 6, verse 14. What then starting with verse 14, for sin will have no dominion over you, since you are not under the law, but under grace. Since we're under grace, then sin is not a problem for us. What then? Are we to sin because we are not under the law, but under grace? By no means. Do you not know that if you present yourself to anyone as obedient slaves, you are slaves to the one whom you obey, either of sin, which leads to death, or of obedience, which leads to righteousness? But thanks be to God that you were once slaves of sin, have become obedient from the heart to the standard of teaching to which you were committed. And so the idea is that we can actually show more grace the more we sin. And if you sin a lot, you have the opportunity for God to show more grace. Okay, this is the idea of antinomianism. That is a heresy, and that heresy is around today. There are areas where this can be seen. So anyway, we see that Jesus is telling his disciples there are going to be heretics that are coming along, and you need to be aware of this. Make sure that you do not fall for the heresies that they are giving. Then it says in verse 24, but in those days after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory, and then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. Now the elect here, I see a note in my Bible that says that these are the tribulation saints. And so these would be the individuals that were saved during the time of the tribulation. But we know that the going to see Christ return. He said that when he arose and from the earth, that he was going to return in like manner. It says that he arose in the clouds. He was going to come back in the clouds. And coming back in this cloud, I wonder whether this cloud is probably going to be the Shekinah glory. The Shekinah glory is the cloud that we have that was over the tabernacle as they went through the wilderness. It was over in the tabernacle when it was in Jerusalem. The Shekinah glory is what I think was the light on the world during creation time before the sun, the moon, and the stars were created. And so the Shekinah glory, I think that this is what Christ is going to come in the clouds in the Shekinah glory to receive his chosen ones. And so we see that during this time that we have says that the gather his elect. I remember very distinctly a humanities class that I had in college at Minot State, where the professor was making a lot of fun of Christians who were talking about that after they died, that they would go to heaven. And he was really poking fun at this. And so he was going with the idea that the sun is 8 light minutes away from the earth. When the sun finally came up this morning, and you didn't see it this morning, but if you would have seen it this morning, it had actually been above the horizon for 8 minutes already, 8.3 minutes, something like that. When the sun sinks and it goes on down, it's actually past the horizon for a little bit more than 8 minutes. It takes that long for the light to come from the sun to the earth. So now, if that takes 8 minutes, and when you die, you go to heaven, where is heaven? Okay, we don't really know, but it's probably outside of the realm of our universe. And so if you're going to go to heaven when you die, even if it's as close as the sun, it's going to take you 8 minutes till you get to heaven. Well, the closest star is 4.2 light years away from the earth. It takes over 4 years for the light to get from that star to the earth. And so if you would go at the speed of light to heaven, and if that heaven is out there by the stars, that means it's going to be more than 4 years before you get to heaven. And I don't think that it takes that long. So anyway, so how is this going to happen? Well, at this time, remember that God created the world. He created the world with all of the characteristics that we have in it, all of the physical limitations and so on. He can modify these. He can change these anytime he wants to. He modified and changed these several times while he was ministering to the disciples. He modified the aspect that the waves would keep on moving after the wind would be quieted down. The waves stopped immediately, so he modified that. And so he can modify this also. I think that when we die, we will show up in heaven immediately without having traveled through the space from here to wherever heaven is. Now, I think we see this Jesus with his glorified body. He showed up at the tomb to Mary, and she didn't see him walking up the path. He just showed up right there. And so I think that he came from the Father, came right there without traversing the area in between. The same thing with the two disciples that were on the way to Emmaus. They're walking along there and discussing the events of the day, and all of a sudden Jesus is right next to them. And so Jesus comes with them, and Jesus actually has a meal with them, and they ask him to stay night, and he says no, he doesn't need to stay night, and he's gone. All right? He left, and he immediately showed up back in his mansion up in heaven without going through the area from here to there. And so in 2 Corinthians it says, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And so that is one of the things that I think we see, that when we die, when our soul departs the body, we know that the body stays here, but the soul immediately goes to heaven. And this is one of the things that I think Jesus is trying to get across. When they are going to not be on the earth, there's going to be all kinds of problems there, but they will be with Jesus at this time. Any comments or questions on this? You probably had the idea that you were going to get a little science sometime during this. Grant.
He said that we are now going to the Gentiles. And we can be so thankful we're in the church age, which is also classified as the time of the Gentiles. Jews can get saved, but primarily in the time of Gentile salvation. But when the rapture takes place, that tribulation, I believe, is the 70th week of Daniel. And that's where the ministry turns back to the Jews, and the Jews realize who Jesus was. And we see just a mass of change in Jewish hearts turning to Jesus as their Savior. Gentiles can also get saved. But I think when you look at the ministry, the Antiochus Epiphanes in like 160 BC, desecrating the temple as kind of a precursor to the tribulation issues. We can be thankful that even though we're not there, and it's a time of suffering in going to be a time of great Gentile salvation. And when I see the elect there, it's not only the Gentiles, it's the Jews, and that's a blessing.
Right, yes. Any other comments or questions? Okay, then verse 28. From the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts out its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near and at the very gates. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. And so we see that he is warning the individuals that the fig tree, when the leaves came on, you know that there should be fruit also. So this is a forebearer of things to come. And the same thing, we see that there are things happening in the world, and this means that, yes, that we are closer to the time of the rapture, closer to the time of Christ's return for his saints than ever because of the things that we are seeing. So this is one of the things that he's trying to point out, and that heaven and earth are not eternal. This heaven and earth that we have here is going to be destroyed, and there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth which is going to be formed. Then we see, but concerning that day or that hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard, keep awake, for disciples here is be aware of what is happening and be alert for the second coming. And this is what he's warning each one of us also, is that there is going to be a time, and for those of us who are living during this time, if you do not accept Jesus at this time, you are not going to have a chance later on. This is your opportunity. And so Jesus gave up his ability to know when this was going to take place. But it will take place, and it says that the heaven and earth will pass away, and the thing that we need to learn from this, and I think the thing that he was trying to emphasize to the disciples is do the things that I have commanded you. He had certain things that he had commanded them, and in Acts, the first beginning of Acts, where he tells them to go on out and to preach the gospel. And so we have the command that we're given, and we are commanded to be faithful. We're commanded to obey his word. We're commanded to be lights to the community around us, and we need to just do those things, not concern ourselves with when these things are going to take place, when the last act is going to happen. Chapter 14. It was now 2 days before the Passover and the feast of unleavened bread, and the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and kill him, for they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar from the people. So there was this plot now to kill Jesus. Now, the Passover was on the 14th day of the month Nisan, which was the beginning of the Jewish New Year. And it began Thursday at sundown and lasted on through all of Friday and Saturday. And so it was the beginning of the Jewish New Year. The Feast of Unleavened Bread was actually a feast that was 7 days long. It began with Passover, but then it extended on for 7 more days. The Passover was one of the feasts that the Jewish males, this was one of the things that you wanted to get to at least once in your lifetime, to the Passover. Every male that lived within 15 miles of Jerusalem was supposed to attend the Passover every year. Those that were further from this didn't have to attend, but they tried to make it. This was one of the things that this was on their bucket list. This was one of the things that they wanted to be able to do. Now, the historical significance of the Passover was the leaving of Egypt. This is when the blood was put on the doorposts, and the angel of death passed over all of those that had the blood. So it passed over the Jews. It did not pass over the Egyptians. It killed the firstborn of each one of the Egyptians. And so they were now supposed to be commemorating this. Josephus records that there were 256,500 lambs that were killed at one Passover. That meant that there were between 2 and 3 million Jews that showed up at the Passover. Jerusalem is not a very big city. And to think that there would be 2 to 3 million people there is just kind of staggers the imagination. So now the Romans were always very careful about making sure that the Jews were kept in line. And so the Roman Empire would send armies at the time of the Passover. And we see that, let's see. Okay, we have the area here, which is called the Antoni. This thing has a mind of its own. Oh, I'll forget that. At the corner of the Temple Mount, you had this 35 acres of Temple Mount. At the northwest corner, now if you're from out east, northwest doesn't mean anything to you. If you're from out west, you know your directions. So anyway, the northwest part of the Temple Mount was where the fort of Antonia was located. And this is where there were the Jews, or where the Romans had their army during the time. Okay, we see it up here. So this was the area that was filled with Roman soldiers all the time, and especially during the time of the Passover, so they could keep track of this. Now, they normally would have been a small contingent would be there. The rest of them would be at Caesarea Maritimus, which is where Pilate lived most of the time also. But anyway, he came on down during this time, And we have this aspect that the Jews wanted to be released from Rome, and Rome felt that during the time of the Passover, since the Jews had been released from Egypt at that time, that they would now take this time and try and be released from Rome. And so this is one of the reasons why they would fortify the area during this time. Okay, we'll stop right there, and we will continue on in chapter 14 next Sunday. You are dismissed.